This video is going to be about quadrilaterals in the coordinate plane. So we can use distance formula to classify quadrilaterals in the coordinate plane. And the steps for doing this is going to be all about using distance formula to find the lengths of the sides and the lengths of the diagonals. So step 1 is going to be find the lengths of all the sides, and step 2 is going to be to find the lengths of all the diagonals. And we're really only going to be working with 4 shapes today. So a parallelogram. And if a quadrilateral is a parallelogram, then its opposite sides will be congruent and its diagonals will not be congruent. Rectangles. In a rectangle, the opposite sides will be congruent and the diagonals will be congruent. Rhombi. In a rhombus, all 4 sides are congruent and your diagonals are not necessarily congruent. And in a square, all 4 sides are congruent and your diagonals are congruent. We're going to be using this information here to classify our quadrilaterals. So, example 1. It says quadrilateral ABCD contains these points, and we want to classify it. So, our options are going to be rectangle, rhombus, or parallelogram, rectangle, rhombus, and square. One thing that might help us is to draw a little picture. It doesn't have to be great. Okay, ABCD, if I draw just a quadrilateral, okay, it kind of looks like a rectangle, but it doesn't necessarily have to be. And the way we name it is you have to be able to go around, and I'm just going to go in clockwise order. A, B, C, D. And this is going to help us with figuring out what are opposite sides, what are our diagonals, and so on. So we're going to start by doing the lengths of all of the sides. So, distance formula. To find AB, we do the square root of x minus x squared plus y minus y squared. So in this case, that's 8 minus 9 squared plus negative 2. Because this is negative 4, it becomes plus 4 squared. And that all works out to be the square root of 5. Now, I'm not turning this into a decimal because it doesn't really matter. I can just look at my radical and know whether or not it's the same as other ones. So I'm going to do the same process from BC. So AB is square root of 5, and BC is square root of 45. And one thing that tells me is that AB and BC are different. And that means that all 4 sides are not the same. So right off the bat, I know this can't be a rhombus and it can't be a square because all 4 sides are not the same. Okay, if I keep going, CD is square root of 5. So AB and CD, those are opposite sides and they're the same. And AD is square root of 45. So looking at this, my opposite sides are congruent. So that means that this could still be a rectangle or a parallelogram. Okay, so now I need to look at my diagonals, AC and BD. Okay, if my diagonals are congruent, it's a rectangle. If they're not congruent, it's a parallelogram. So if I find the square root of AC, I go 2 minus 9 squared plus negative 5 plus 4 squared. I skipped a lot of work, but it ends up being square root of 50. And then BD is also square root of 50. So my diagonals are congruent. And since my diagonals are congruent, this is not a parallelogram, it is a rectangle. So this is the general process. It is kind of a lot of work because you have to do the distance formula 6 times. Okay, but this will work every time to classify a shape as a parallelogram, a rectangle, a rhombus, or a square. So let's do one more example. Example 2, we're going to do this the same way. So quadrilateral QRST. So let's draw that really quick. Okay, so once again, it doesn't need to be perfect. This is just so I can look at it. Q, R, S, and T. All right, so first, starting with the sides, QR is square root of 13. RS ends up being square root of 13. ST ends up being square root of 13. And QT ends up being square root of 13. So all 4 sides are congruent. And because of that, I know that this is either a rhombus or a square. To determine which one it's going to be, I need to find the lengths of my diagonals. If my diagonals are congruent, if they're the same, then it's a rhombus, or then it's a square. If my diagonals are not congruent, then it's a rhombus. So, go through my diagonals. QS ends up working out to be just 6. And RT ends up being 4. So, QS and RT are not congruent, which tells me that this is not a square, it is a rhombus. So that's how you use the distance formula to classify a quadrilateral as being either a parallelogram, a rectangle, a rhombus, or a square.